Okay, now we can go with the next speaker, is Emma Burnip. She's a speech and language therapist working at the University of Canterbury. The title of her talk is Skill-Based Dysphagia, Training as an Intervention for Individuals with Huntington's Disease. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this opportunity to share our work. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the support of these HD associations without whom this project would not have been possible. So dysphagia, or impaired swallowing, is highly prevalent, even considered a universal symptom of Huntington's disease, associated with the leading cause of death. At the moment, there's a real lack of evidence to support dysphagia rehab in HD, but there are some promising studies in the physiotherapy literature and in other neurodegenerative diseases, which suggest that intensive rehabilitation may have some positive outcomes. In HD, the motor deficits are characterized by irregular, imprecise, and uncoordinated sequences, so the impairment is not due to primary weakness. Therefore, other swallowing rehab approaches aimed to strengthen swallowing muscles may not be appropriate. Therefore, a skill-based training incorporates the principles of motor learning to maximize neuroplasticity reported in early HD and aims to increase cortical activation and modulation to improve swallowing biomechanics. Therefore, this research aimed to evaluate the feasibility and the effectiveness of a skill-based dysphagia training, and then to evaluate the retention of any treatment effects after therapy. We used a within-subject ABA study design with 12 adults with symptomatic Huntington's and dysphagia. They had no comorbidities and adequate cognition to participate. Each participant completed 4 assessment sessions and 2 weeks of daily treatment. The study design, as you can see, included an initial lead-in period of 2 weeks at the beginning to measure baseline, and after therapy, there was another period of non-treatment to evaluate skill retention. We use surface electromyography hardware and biofeedback and strength and skill training software for the treatment. The SEMG electrodes were attached under the chin to represent submental muscle activation during swallowing. And as you'll see in a second, this was a peak shown as a peak waveform on the computer screen. Patients were asked to swallow with the right timing and amplitude in order to hit that target box, just like that. And the box was set between 30 and 70% of the patient's maximum effort swallows. It also changed in size and placement in response to the person's performance. Each 1-hour session included 80 saliva swallows with short breaks in between the blocks. And this therapy, as you can see, really aimed to improve that precision and accuracy of the swallowing response through biofeedback. We completed a wide range of standardized swallowing assessments pre and post therapy. These included behavioral assessments, such as the timed water swallow test and the test of masticating and swallowing solids. And participants also completed a self-reported quality of life questionnaire during each assessment session. We also used instrumental assessments such as ultrasound, pharyngeal manometry, and video fluoroscopy, which you can see at the bottom pictures. And these were used to obtain several measurements of swallowing timing and displacement of swallowing structures, as well as rating swallowing safety using the standardized penetration aspiration scale. Raters were blinded and the results were obtained using mixed methods ANOVAs. We had no dropouts and no adverse effects, and we did have some positive anecdotal reports of perceived improvements in patient swallowing, such as fewer coughing episodes whilst eating and drinking. However, these didn't translate to any significant treatment effects picked up on the timed water swallow test or test of masticating solids. We did see significant improvements in swallowing quality of life, which were maintained 2 weeks after therapy. But there were no other significant swallowing treatment effects in any of the other ultrasound or manometric outcomes. Of the video fluoroscopy results, we found that total transit time significantly increased, which meant that the liquid bolus swallows were a bit longer after therapy, moving more towards normative values. These longer transit times were retained 2 weeks post-therapy. Additionally, there was a significant reduction in opening of the upper esophageal sphincter for puree bolus just after therapy. There is no indication that this compromised the efficiency of the bolus transport, and it wasn't retained 2 weeks afterwards. None of the other outcome measures reached statistical significance. For swallowing safety, the majority of the penetration aspiration scale ratings in blue and orange, as you can see, fell within the normal range of swallowing. So overall, this patient group had relatively safe swallowing on these particular 5 ml bolus trials. There was only 3 occasions out of the 36 swallows where the bolus was judged to contact the vocal folds before it was cleared after therapy. All puree bolus swallows, as you can see, fell within normal limits with little change after therapy. So in summary, this exploratory research tells us that, yes, it is feasible intervention. All patients could complete the task with behavioral improvements. Patients reported improvements in quality of life post-therapy, and that was consistent with other intervention studies. There was no measurable deterioration in swallowing following intensive rehab, but overall there was little evidence to suggest that this training was effective in altering the swallowing biomechanics of these particular patients. We therefore can't really evaluate the retention of these treatment effects. So this research adds to other exploratory studies in skill-based swallowing rehab, but there were limitations to acknowledge. Firstly, this patient cohort had relatively mild or minimally compromised swallowing safety, which could highlight a possible ceiling effect. This study used a small sample size due to recruitment difficulties with this rare genetic disease, especially in a small country such as New Zealand. And the participants really varied in disease stages and in their motor symptoms. We did, however, demonstrate that the participants could do the therapy, they could control, they could adapt their swallowing using biofeedback, and also had improved perceived improvements in their swallowing. So going forward, it could be that swallowing in HD is not so amenable to change through rehabilitation, but there's definitely some room to explore skill-based approaches using longer treatment protocols with larger samples of individuals, perhaps with more severe swallowing dysfunction, and then that we'll be able to fully evaluate any potential benefits of dysphagia rehab in Huntington's disease. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Emma. And I believe you're here to answer some questions. We don't yet have anything through from the audience, so I can get started. How easy was it to do you think it would be to roll this out into standard kind of physiotherapy, or does that need to be in specialist centers?
Yeah, I think the main part of this, the main idea of this research was especially with surface electromyography. So it's obviously reading that muscle activation under the chin of the swallowing muscles, was just to see if that was even possible in HD because of that, the extra movements. So yeah, the first time we put that on the first patient as a feasibility study, that was interesting. But I think the main thing is it's possible. We haven't got good enough evidence yet to say that it's effective, this particular therapy. So going forward, like I said, having some larger treatment studies and perhaps altering that dose a little bit. So perhaps instead of 2 weeks of therapy, a little bit longer follow-up could be really good. So yeah, it's very much exploratory at the moment, but this obviously it's a feasibility study, so it's just exploring whether it was even a possible thing to do daily swallowing therapy with these people.
We have a question from Anne Rosser. What does adequate cognition mean in the context of this study? You mentioned the need for longer protocols. Do you mean longer period of training?
Yeah, so as I just said, I think probably altering the dose and doing some further research into, yeah, whether 3 weeks or 4 weeks perhaps, or maybe not so many. Yeah, we just need to get a bit more clear about the dose, but I think that's the case in a lot of swallowing therapies at the moment. And adequate cognition was just to make sure that they could consent to taking part and they fully understood. So that was judged by the referring neurologist. Yeah, so we also actually took did a cognition assessment as well, just as baseline, to see if there was any people who did better or worse based on the MOCA, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. There was no specific, nothing else came out of that. So yeah, people with a range of cognitive.
Yeah. Did you get much feedback directly from patients about kind of doing it?
Yeah.
Like, I know you did the assessments. But...
Yeah, there was a lot of concern initially from myself as well as to whether people would manage with daily therapy. It worked better when we went to people's homes and went in and took the laptop, and we used that and got some really positive feedback as they were looking forward to the sessions. It gave them a bit of routine in the day. They're really challenging themselves. It was a computer game effectively against themselves to see if they could get into that target box and improve the precision of their swallowing. And yeah, a lot of people mentioned that, oh, I find it a bit easier to swallow at meal times now and to have, you know, drinks of water. But unfortunately, there was nothing that came over into the standardized assessments.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Emma. If there's any more questions, they can be answered via the platform.